I can't control where my taxes go. I can't control what I'm charged for rent each month. But what I can do, I can boycott Loblaws in order for them to lower their prices.
That's Toronto-based TikToker Kernette talking about her plans to join a Loblaws boycott. The idea of a boycott began with a Reddit forum called Loblaws is Out of Control. People gathered there to complain about grocery prices at the chain. There are now more than 60,000 members in that group. The boycott starts today and is supposed to run for all of May. Emily Johnson started the Reddit group and is one of the organizers of the boycott. Emily, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Why are you boycotting Loblaws?
I mean, there's a number of reasons that I feel any of us are really boycotting Loblaws. They've got the largest market share out of all of the big five grocers, and they operate in a number of areas in the country which are food deserts, where Loblaw is the only option.
And so Loblaw owns all sorts of stores. I mean, it's Loblaw, it's No Frills, it's the Atlantic Superstore, it's Provigo, it's Shoppers Drug Mart, T&T. Are you boycotting everything?
All of them.
And Loblaws instead of Metro or Sobeys because of the market share?
Primarily because of the market share and those food deserts that I mentioned. We recognize Loblaw isn't the only problem, but our community felt that they are the biggest problem. And the hope is to make sweeping industry changes and that these other grocers will take note of what's going on here.
We have talked a lot about the cost of groceries on this program, and we've heard a lot from Canadians over the course of the last year or two about what that means for them. What does that mean for you? How has the rising cost of groceries affected you personally?
I mean, personally, when I found myself as a single parent on EI, taking care of two very young children, that was my first introduction to, the cost of living crisis that all of us are facing right now. And we had to start cutting costs wherever we could. And I think the biggest bill that a lot of us are drawn attention to are those grocery prices.
What has that meant for you? When you say you're cutting costs, how difficult has it been to make ends meet?
I mean, for me, it's always been a struggle. I work full time and I have two young kids. And, if I didn't have my child tax benefit helping supplement my income, I don't think I'd be able to pay my rent, make my car payment, pay my groceries, and so on.
So what specifically are you asking for from Loblaw?
So we've got a few demands. We are asking them to sign the Grocers Code of Conduct. We are asking for no further retailer-led price increases for 2024, no further increases to dividends, an increased cost transparency, so clearly identifying items which have undergone shrinkflation. We're asking for a commitment to affordable pricing, including price caps on essential grocery items, as well as a commitment to end price gouging with costs quickly reflecting market conditions. So when food inflation and inflation cools, we'd like to see our costs at the grocery store cool as well.
What do you think? I mean, and you've kind of hinted at that at the end, but when you go through those various requests, demands, what have you, what do you think that would mean, given the situation that you described? What is it going to mean for your grocery bill?
Ideally, I'd like to see that everyone's grocery bills are decreasing and that, food security is increasing for every Canadian.
This is an individual company. They run a business. It's not a charity. Why should they, for example, put a cap on the amount of money that they can make, the dividends that they could pay to their shareholders and what have you?
I feel like it's important to be listening to customers. I feel like it's important to be recognizing that we are all facing a cost of living crisis like we have never seen before. And to continually post record profits, there's a bit of a disconnect there. I feel for myself and for a lot of the members of our community.
How many people, I mean, I mentioned that 60,000 people were on this Reddit group. How many people do you expect to join the boycott?
It's so difficult to pin down a number because we could say, it might be 60% of our subreddit. It might be more than that. We get so many stories of people saying they've already been boycotting Loblaw for years and, they don't intend to stop anytime soon. Or you hear stories of people talking about their mom or their dad and, their circles are boycotting, but they don't follow us on any of the socials.
I mean, there are people who might live in an area where there are limited options in terms of where they can shop. And I ran down all of those stores that Loblaw owns and the various chains that they have. For people who live in a small town, or maybe they don't have a car, or maybe they live in an area, as I say, where Loblaw is the only game in town, what would you want from them?
We absolutely understand there are disability, mobility concerns, even price concerns in some areas too, right? So we encourage folks to reach out to their local member of parliament. We've even created a template letter for people to use, as well as a link to help you find your local MP to write to them to share your frustrations. We also encourage folks to reach out to Loblaw customer support, asking them to take this movement seriously, as well as, donating time or money to your local food bank as you're able to, and to be sharing your message with your circles. You might not be able to boycott, but other folks that you talk to, like friends or family or colleagues, may be able to.
We asked Loblaw for an interview. Nobody was available to talk to us today, but they sent us a statement that reads in part, "The last few years have been tough for Canadians. We continue to do what we can to combat inflation at our stores. Customers are noticing with more visits in our stores and many commenting in that same Reddit groups that they are getting real value at our stores." What do you say to that statement that customers say that they're getting real value at these Loblaw stores?
I mean, I'm not going to tell another person what their experience has been. I'm here as, one voice of many who's trying to represent the many. I think that it's important to take into consideration that some of the discount brands, such as No Frills, are a great option for people. But we also have to consider the locations of, say, a Shoppers Drug Mart is in a much more walkable or busable area than, say, a No Frills might be in a lot of places.
Realistically, just before I let you go, what do you think you'll achieve with this?
My hope, again, is to decrease grocery prices and increase food security for all Canadians.
You think you'll be able to do that? Do you think that is actually achievable?
As a good faith idealist, yes, I do. And I mean, I do have a meeting lined up with Per Bank, the CEO of Loblaw, to discuss our concerns further and to see how we can move forward.
Maybe we'll talk to you after you have that meeting. That will be an interesting conversation. In the meantime, Emily, thanks for speaking with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Emily Johnson is one of the organizers of the Loblaw boycott. Monica Labarge is an adjunct assistant professor of marketing at Queen's University, and she researches consumer well-being and food access. Monica, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Well, I'm well, thanks. Emily, we just heard, got a meeting with the CEO of Loblaw. Beyond that, what impact do you think this boycott is going to have?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think Emily has a fantastic future in organizing all those things she listed in terms of the demands and the sort of steps that people can take. And it's fantastic. She got a meeting with the CEO. I, too, will be closely tuned to the radio to hear what the outcome of that is. I think Emily is reflecting the feelings that a lot of Canadians have and a lot of consumers have about a real powerlessness, especially in the face of food prices, right? Which is something that's so important to us fundamentally. You sort of can't do without food. So I think Emily's efforts to try and make her voice heard and to try and help other people amplify their voices with a real concern, that affects our day-to-day lives. I think it's really admirable, and I wish her the greatest success in that.
Is that powerlessness in the face of rising costs? Is that why you think people would join a boycott like this?
Well, that's, typically that's what we see with boycotts, is that it's a feeling of powerlessness. And that's one of the reasons why consumers tend to join these boycotts. Often it's related to a moral issue. Often we see boycotts around things like environmental causes or, labor practices or geopolitical issues like boycotts of, Russian companies. And we're seeing increasingly calls for boycotts of Israeli companies. To the extent that is true here, I think Emily accurately tied food prices to food insecurity, which is a moral issue for many people. When we see people in our communities going hungry and Canada, to be totally honest, doesn't have great social programs. We don't have federally funded food aid programs in schools. We don't have specific aid programs like they do in the U.S., the women, infant, and children, and sort of food stamp programs. So, there is a connection between food prices and food insecurity beyond access issues. Emily talked about food deserts, but prices really are the number one driver for why Canadians can't access healthy food.
Loblaw put out its first quarter earnings this morning. Revenue is something like $13.58 billion, up from $13 billion a year earlier. That might answer this question, but why is Loblaw getting so much of the blame for rising food prices?
Yeah, I heard the statement that you read, and to be totally honest, it's really hard to square that whole. When you have, on the one hand, they say they're trying to control costs and keep prices low, and yet revenues and earnings continue to rise, right? Those things don't align, even for business people, that you can't make those two things happen at the same time. So I think that's one of the things. I think an important piece too, Emily mentioned at the very beginning, the Grocer Code of Conduct, the fact that Loblaws and Walmart are the only non-signatories to that, it isn't a good look. And the question is, why wouldn't you want to sign on to a code of conduct? And I think, there's a variety of missteps in the past that Loblaws has done in terms of, for example, the bread price fixing scandal, which all sort of introduced the idea to us that prices aren't, fixed in, the ether and drawn down, that there is some manipulation that can happen there. And so I think there's a variety of different things that all have added up to, maybe this being the straw that breaks the camel's back.
It's unclear how many people will actually participate in a boycott like this, but we're talking about it and other people are as well. What sort of damage do you think this could do to Loblaw companies when it comes to the image of the brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's likely that the damage is less likely to be financial because, as you said, and as Emily pointed out, the market share of Loblaws is so high. So you'd need a pretty high proportion of customers to boycott the stores for there to be real financial damage. But I think the damage is most likely to be erosion of brand image. As you said, you're talking about it. The more negative publicity Loblaws gets, it's not helping their brand image, and it does contribute to this perception that they are while they may not be the only culprit, that they are sort of the leader or the poster boy for these rising prices, and that makes them vulnerable to losing customers to other competitors, even other big competitors, but certainly. It would actually be probably a pretty good thing for all of us for strengthening our local food supply, for us to look into alternatives like independent grocers and farmers markets and CSAs and other alternatives for getting our food. And so I think that's the real risk is eroding that brand image and losing some of their customer base.
Monica, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Monica Labarge is an adjunct assistant professor of marketing at Queen's University. A Competition Bureau study last year found that Canada needs more grocery competition. Right now, close to 80% of the Canadian market is controlled by 5 companies: Loblaw companies, Metro, Walmart, Costco, and Empire Company, which owns Sobeys. Joining me now is the Deputy Commissioner of the Competition Promotion Branch at the Competition Bureau of Canada. Anthony DeRoche is in our Ottawa studio. Anthony, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
How much concentration, when you take a look at that, I said almost 80%, how much of that is responsible for higher grocery prices?
Well, certainly the Canadian grocery market is concentrated. And, as we said in the title of our report, Canada needs more grocery competition. We know that competition is good for consumers, puts downward pressure on price, gives more choice, but also very important and good for the economy. It's what drives productivity and is what grows our economy forward, which is good for everyone. So Canada needs more grocery competition and needs more competition across the economy.
Let's talk specifically about that kind of competition. The Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, François-Philippe Champagne, has said that he would like to see a foreign deep discounter enter the market. This is something that the Competition Bureau has supported. If you take a look at that type of grocery retailer, a deep discounter that comes from abroad, how much of a difference would that make in terms of what people pay for their food?
Well, that's a really good question. And certainly one of the recommendations on how to increase competition in our report was to facilitate and support the entry of international grocers. And in our report, we examined the impact that the entry of foreign grocers have had in other countries. So Australia is a good example where the Australian Competition Authority looked at the impact of Aldi, which is a deep German discounter, and their entry in the Australian market, and found that there was a significant impact from that entry on lowering prices.
This is what people call the Aldi effect.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And if we try and extrapolate from that, what could happen in Canada with the entry of a foreign competitor? Generally speaking, competition is good, and competition is what is going to force incumbent grocers to fight for their client base and lower prices. So that is certainly one of the most meaningful things that can happen to stimulate competition in this country, is to see more of it. And that could be from independent grocers who play an important role, but also the entry of foreign grocers.
What is stopping a deep discounter like Aldi from coming into the Canadian market?
Well, in the context of our study, we spoke with a number of foreign competitors who had analyzed the Canadian market, and I think a number of them are still looking closely at the options. Every company has to make their business decisions as to, does it make sense from a business standpoint, and is the timing right for entry? But one of our recommendations was for governments at all levels to look for ways to facilitate that, be it using regulatory levers or anything to entice that entry, recognizing that it can have an important impact.
There are a few things, though, that have been pointed to as reasons why those international companies may not come here. One is around concerns about wages here and whether they would be able to make the money that they need to make to come in to start a business here because of how much people are paid here. How much of that is a factor?
Well, there are a number of factors, and the Canadian market, I think, is attractive in a number of respects. But what we're recommending to government is really look at ways and speak to some of these companies to look at ways to make it more attractive to enter. And we know that companies have been and are actively looking at the Canadian market because it is an attractive one. And I think what we're seeing through this boycott and others is there is a thirst for more options from consumers.
I mean, one of the other issues is where they would set up. There's this issue of property controls, restrictive covenants. This is something the Competition Bureau has looked into. It makes it hard for a grocery business to figure out where to actually set up shop, right?
That's exactly right. So
how does that work?
So restrictive covenant or property controls are basically contractual restrictions that can be in leases, for example, which restrict what competitors can do with land. So if you have a grocer in a shopping center, that might create barriers for other competing grocers to set up shop. And this is problematic to stimulate more competition in the sector. And one of our recommendations in our market study was for provincial governments to look into limiting or potentially banning the use of property controls. And also in the last few months, we've announced that we have an investigation to examine the potential for anti-competitive property controls in the grocery sector.
And that could prevent a chain from coming in because if there's
Correct.
a vacant spot, they may not be able to lease that spot because of those property controls.
Exactly. It is a barrier to entry, and that's why we're looking at this very closely.
When the CEOs of the major grocers were hauled in front of a parliamentary committee, they denied that they were to blame for food inflation. We've heard that before. So if there was more competition, do we know whether that would actually drive prices down?
We believe so. We think competition, it's not the only solution to high food prices, but it is a major part of the solution. There's room for more competition in the sector. That's what we determined in our market study. And we continue to believe there's much more scope and room to prioritize competition throughout the Canadian economy. Competition is not just good for consumers, but it is good for our economy, and it's what keeps our economy growing.
Well, it's certainly not just groceries either. Just in the last minute that we have, I mean, I think people might be scratching their head wondering why it's so difficult to have more competition in this country. I mean, take a look at your cell phone bill. Take a look at the amount that you pay to fly in this country. Why is it so difficult? Why is this a persistent problem in Canada?
Simply put, we haven't prioritized competition enough as a country. And I am optimistic, and we are at the Bureau, that is slowly changing. We have been reforming our competition laws to give the Competition Bureau more power, more tools to protect and promote competition. And parliamentarians are paying attention because this is what Canadians want. They want more competition. And what we need is to really prioritize it in our economy, and that really takes governments at all levels, federal, provincial, municipal, to say competition is important. It is the main solution to grow our economy and to address our productivity challenges as a country.
Anthony, good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anthony DeRoche is the Deputy Commissioner of the Competition Promotion Branch at the Competition Bureau of Canada.